I feel like, we've sort of glossed over the fact that you and I watched some crazy stuff this past weekend. Some stuff that I didn't think we would see. And we're not going to spend all day talking about AEW, but we'd be remiss if we didn't at least bring up AEW's big pay-per-view extravaganza in Chicago. I think it beat all expectations for attendance, and I was really happy to see that because last year, man, they had such a short runway. We did StarCast associated with it, but it made it tough to sort of promote that event and even the actual pay-per-view because you got one pay-per-view on Sunday and then 6 days later you got another one. So you got to really tighten up some stories. I don't think they're going to do that next year based on the calendar we've heard. This year they moved it back a week, so they had 13 days as opposed to 6 days. So it was better, but I wasn't so sure how it would draw. And to my surprise, it did really, really well. But the actual event itself, the content of the show is what had everyone buzzing. We saw thumbtacks in the ladies match. I saw some spots in there I'd never seen before. We saw Bryan Danielson get a bag over his head, which I couldn't believe people were outraged about in 2024. But then in the main event, a cinder block and a syringe and another chair shot. I, for one, don't have an issue with the chair shot. I mean, if anybody was concerned it was gimmicked, I think that was clear. But you and I did a live watch along with all of our folks over at adfreeshows.com. And somebody to my left, as I couldn't exactly see exactly who it was, but I heard the voice say when Swerve Strickland picked the cinder block up and he dropped it on the mat, "Oh, I wish it would have smashed into a million pieces." And I turned and looked and said, "Hey, man, he did that to prove to you it's not gimmicked. It's a real cinder block." And then we see a cop killer on the doggone thing, and up comes Adam Page, and he's all scraped up. And I'm like, oh, my, what an evolution of the business. As a kid, we used to all think, hey, the ring's just a trampoline. No, it's actually not. It's reinforced steel and boards and a little bit of foam and then a canvas that will burn the shit out of your skin. But now, as if that's not enough, let's put doggone concrete on top of it. That's what they did. And then we finished with a syringe through the mouth. Like, I don't remember ever seeing that before anywhere, even independent wrestling. Maybe it has happened somewhere in Japan and I missed it. I don't, wow. You want to talk about up in the ante and the violence and the craziness. This was over the top. What did you think about the presentation?
It's just desperation. I don't, well, I do get it. I'm just searching for a different way to say it, and it's hard, but I just think creatively they're in a pit, and apparently the harder they're trying to dig out of it, the deeper the pit gets. This was garbage, in my opinion. It's not the kind of thing that you'll build an audience with. It's not the kind of thing you can build a business around. Look, I can't take AEW or anything they do seriously. They are what they are. They're going to be what they're going to be, which is a niche company that is going to have its base of fans. It's going to always be a small percentage of the overall wrestling market, but they're going to have 100% control over that percentage of the market that loves that crazy hardcore stuff just for the sake of it. Good for them. If they can build a business and be successful satisfying that percentage of the audience, then go with God and be successful. I can't take it seriously because I don't think it's going to play. I don't care if they get 5 more renewals. I don't care if they get television on other, sports cable outlets, all the rumors that I'm seeing. Those are all good things, but it's not going to change the product. It's not going to grow the business. So hats off to him. I was, Bryan Danielson, and, you made the statement, you can't believe that people got upset with that in 2024.
Yeah.
And I understand, but tell me why. Tell me why you feel that way.
Well, first of all, I mean, what made me sort of laugh out loud is I saw some of the, and I'll just call it like I see it, fake outrage about the spot. And they're making comparisons to, they're going to lose sponsors. Well, first of all, what sponsors? Yeah. As far as I know, AEW has 2 sponsors for their television show that are like real deal sponsors. But this is a pay-per-view, bud. I mean, anybody who buys an AEW pay-per-view knows there's going to be crazy over-the-top stunts and violence. I mean, anytime you got John Moxley and Darby Allin and somebody, they're looking to create spectacles. So I expected some spectacles. I expected some craziness. But I feel like that was, in 1989 when Funk did that to Flair, wrestling was certainly presented more to children. And this aired on television. And that's not what this is. This isn't on television. And AEW is not aimed at children. And I know people are saying, oh, but what if a kid at home tries that? We just saw ladies wrestling in thumbtacks. I'm just saying, I don't want kids jumping off ladders. I don't want kids hitting each other with kendo sticks or chairs over the head or. I mean, any of these moves, like remove the damn cinder block from the spot. A cop killer, I don't want kids doing that in their backyard. Like, kids can't be getting dropped on their head. I'm just saying that seems like a silly line to draw. Like, oh, well, this is too far. That's too far in the same show where we saw cinder blocks and chair shots and thumbtacks.
Can I jump in there for a second?
Yeah,
Just to support what you're saying. And you look at video games and the type of incredibly graphic violence that's manufactured and created digitally, targeted towards kids. You're going to watch kids do any of that shit too? I mean, you can take that justification or that perspective of, well, we don't want kids to do it. You can take that and apply it to just about any other form of entertainment you want to. So it's a convenient thing, right?
Yes.
It's a very convenient bitch. I have no problem with any of that. That's not my issue. First of all, if your kids are doing this kind of stuff at home, just like if they're recreating video game, hijackings and murder scenes, yeah, you got a problem. And it probably started a long time ago before wrestling came into the equation or a video game came into the equation. So I'm not suggesting that that's my issue. My issue is that it's just cheap. It's just cheap. It is not creative. Is it a wink and a nod to Funk and Flair? Okay, great. 1 out of 3,000 people will get that or care. To me, it's just, you got Bryan Danielson, for God's sake, who's capable of doing so much. And you're going to choke him out with a plastic, but you're going to suffocate him. I think I don't want to say disgust. That's too strong. But my negative reaction to it all was it's just cheap heat. It's lazy. It's not creative. And to the point someone made about advertisers, I do disagree with you a little bit on that point, because an advertising agency isn't going to delineate between, well, what's on pay-per-view and what's on TV. That's a conversation people in the industry will have. But a 28-year-old woman on Madison Avenue who sees a clip on YouTube isn't going to say, but is that pay-per-view or is that TV?
Oh, come on.
It's going to create an impression. It just does.
I'm not arguing that, but I am saying, by and large, my understanding is these folks, the buyers, they're going to watch the program. They're going to want to know what their commercial is up against. So, not to throw AEW under the bus, but a few years ago, they did have a bit of a maybe poor timing moment when Nick Gage was wrestling Chris Jericho and was cutting him with a pizza cutter and went right into a pizza commercial. I could see how people would be upset about that. That's not what this happened. That's not what this was. We didn't transition from the bag over the head to a hefty commercial. That's not what happened. Now, it would have been hilarious. It would have been hilarious if immediately we got a Ziploc commercial. But that's not what and by the way, if I worked there, I would have worked hard to sell that sponsorship because I would have thought it was hilarious and gone viral. But I just know that's not what the circumstance is. And I wanted to bring up something because I feel like you hit the nail on the head with the video game analogy. I remember as a kid, there was a discussion about should kids have video game guns? Because as a kid, I had a regular Nintendo, and one of my favorite games had a gun where you pointed at the screen and you shoot ducks. Now, you might say to yourself, was it a shotgun? If you don't remember, no, I was shooting ducks with a pistol. It made no sense, but that's what Nintendo marketed to us. And there was a discussion about, hey, is that good? Is that okay? But at the same time, I could go to the toy aisle and half of my toys were different toy machine guns and Uzis and Mac 10s and all that sort of stuff. And we did away with that. And we said, hey, that's too close. That's too dangerous. That's risky. That might be setting a bad precedent. And then we fast forward, and now kids play video games where they're drug runners and they're smuggling dope and they're trying to become a kingpin in Miami and they're stealing
And it's glorified.
and having hookers and shooting them in the face to get their money back. I mean, this is the evolution. And we're like, well, he had a bag over his head. What if kids try that at home? Well, what if, I mean, Darby Allin and Jeff Hardy have been jumping, and Shane McMahon have been looking to the ceilings to say, what can I jump off of today? I don't want kids jumping off of it. Where is the line? The plastic bag talk is fake outrage BS.
I don't disagree. For the people that are arguing that, oh, it's a bad influence on kids, I agree. That's just them hating on it and using that as a cheap excuse. I think the reason that people are against it, frankly, is for the same reason I am. It's just like, are you kidding me? This goes against everything. I was thinking about this morning when I first woke up, knowing we were going to be talking about this. You know, if you go back and you look at AEW in the very beginning and a lot of the conversation about AEW before they first aired, and there was a reason why so many people, including myself, were excited about the potential. And it sounded like in the beginning, Tony was going to take a very different approach to professional wrestling, create a more sports-based platform where, you know, wins and losses matter. And there's a discussion about, you know, records and who earned what spot. I like all that because that's a basic framework for the question why. And if you're able to, and it's very, very difficult, I'm not surprised that it came and went because other people have tried it, including me. And it's really hard to do without booking yourself off a cliff. That's what happens. It can be done, but it's hard. But I was excited about that. I was excited about being an alternative to WWE, especially at that time. People won't remember this because people choose to remember what they want to remember in the moment. But months before, I was actually offered the job to come and work for WWE in 2019. I was very critical of the product. And you can go back and find it on some of my earlier podcasts with Nick Hausman, where I talked about the fact that, you know, WWE has a sameness to it, had at that point in time when Vince was in charge. Vince had he had a filter, he had a lens through which he looked at the product. And he was such a micromanager that his fingerprints, Vince McMahon's fingerprints, were on just about everything that the consumer saw with regard to WWE and its brand, especially the product in the ring. And there was a point in time when the characters, yes, they had different, you know, they dressed differently, they had different colors, and blah, blah, blah. But there was such a sameness to the characters. I'm not talking about the gimmicks they wore to the ring, but the way they presented themselves, the way they moved, the types of matches they had, the promos that they cut, some of the language, some of the narrative that was in there. And I remember I was there, I watched it. You know, you'd have a bunch of writers working with the talent, trying to figure out, you know, a promo. And then you'd take it to Vince McMahon for approval because he had to approve every single thing. And God forbid if there was a typo, even though it was a draft and we were 20 minutes before showtime. But if there was a typo, Vince would lose his shit, kick the whole thing out, tell you you write like a fifth grader, and come back when you've got something better. And that process resulted in a sameness. It's like everything was Vince McMahon's perspective. And that sameness was boring. So when Tony came out and was talking about the things that he was going to do differently, and you know how I feel about better than, different than, less than, when he was talking so much about what they were going to do differently, I was genuinely excited. But I think as we've seen over time, not only because the roster is populated so heavily with ex-WWE talent, that's part of it, but the content that we're seeing in the ring is not so alternative anymore. And the stuff that is alternative is what we saw Saturday night. A syringe in the face. And, you know, I smashed a cinder block over Jim Ross. Put it right on his head, stomped on it. There's a fake cinder block, obviously. So it's not like the first time that's ever been done. I'm not criticizing that. I am critical, though, of the lack of imagination and creativity, and the fact that AEW has become essential. In my opinion, this is just my opinion. It's become a dollar store version of WWE, and it's again, it's missed opportunity. The opportunity was there in 2019. The opportunity is still there, but I don't see it ever happening because the guy in control just is doing what he wants to do and what appeals to him. And unfortunately, I don't think he understands the audience as well as he should.
Let me say this. All the violent stuff, when people get outraged, I always sort of go, yeah, but what are you really upset about? Like, oh, kids are going to do this. That's nonsense. But Eric Jones, who's with us live here as part of our live studio audience, which you can be too if you join us at adfreeshows.com. We'll talk about that later. Eric says, I'm against it. He's talking about the bag over the head spot because it's stupid. I'm watching wrestling. Chokeholds don't stop men, but cheap ass can't hold my groceries from the car to the house without ripping choked a man. So he's talking about the idea that, hey, logically, it is hard to sort of hang your hat on the fact that Bryan Danielson couldn't just rip the bag open. I get that. So if we're going to poke holes in the logic, okay. Now, granted, there's a lot we have to sort of suspend our disbelief for just a little bit and to enjoy wrestling. But I think that is a better argument as opposed to, oh, think of the children. That's nonsense.